And good morning, everyone, and welcome to a very special Small Biz Matters, another one of our election specials here, leading up to the federal election to be held on the 2nd of July. Let me start off with, as I do with all of these specials, encouraging everyone not to pre-vote, but to head down to your local school, buy yourself a sausage sizzle, take the kids down, feed everyone, and grab a cake for Saturday night's dinner, because we are the fundraisers for the Hornsby area. And of course, without us, that school's going to miss out on approximately $2,000. So each of those elections are very worthwhile. So a bit of a thank you to my guest here today, which is Brendan Clarke, who is the candidate for the Science Party in the seat of Berowra. Welcome very much to the show.
Oh, thank you for having me, Alexi.
It's an absolute pleasure. Now, we're going to talk a little bit today about things that the Science Party has strengths in and obviously very clear policy in, things like the NBN, the climate change situation, renewable energy, and of course the importance of funding for scientists as well. We're going to touch a little bit on the economy, as we are for all of our guests here on the show. But first of all, Brendan, what I'd like to do to begin is to invite my guests to explain what brought you to run for the seat of Berowra? What is it that's your expertise that leads you into the Science Party? And really, why politics?
Oh, very good questions. Well, the first thing is I've always been interested in politics from a young age. Paul Keating basically announced his innovation statement of the Sunrise Industries, saying that we should get into science and technology back in 1980s. And all the way through my life, I've been looking at Australia and seeing that we've been missing out on opportunities, and we're still digging things out of the ground. And it wasn't until 2013 when the Abbott government came in and assumed power that they the first thing they did was to abolish the position of the science minister, which really disgusted me. Anyway, so I suppose the next thing was I'm actually involved in a thing called Australian Transhumanism. I'm one of the co-founders. And transhumanism is basically where we actually use science and technology to improve the condition of people's lives. So as you know, the more technology we have, generally the easier our life is and the more equal people are.
So you look at it from a balance of a sort of a sociological perspective? Sure.
So I'm actually volunteer as a technological evangelist, where I actually go out and promote different types of technology use. And it wasn't until I was working at Commonwealth Bank that one of my mates who I met there was also involved in transhumanism and went to one of those meetup groups online. So we met a guy called Peter Zing, who's the other founder of the actual transhumanism, and we decided to form a political party to actually achieve our vision of Australia being a high technology society. And it's really hard. So it was just lucky that Peter and that found another group of people called James Jansen, the leader of the Science Party. It was called the Future Party back then. And they share almost exactly the same vision that we have. So we basically joined together and hence the Future Party. And we changed our name this year to make it a little bit more accessible to people to understand what we do. And so we named ourselves the Science Party this year. Yeah,
I think that does actually make it very much more accessible. People are talking about it on social media. People hear, I'll even mention when I said that I was bringing you on the show today, a number of my friends who live locally say, oh, great, I didn't even know we had a candidate for the Science Party. So that's really excellent. And how many seats in, is it Australia, or do you know how many seats are being contested in the lower house?
In the lower house, I think there's 10 in the lower house, and there's 2 in New South Wales Senate. We've done a coalition with the Cyclist Party as well.
Is that in the Senate or in the lower house?
In the Senate.
In the Senate, right, yep.
And we've got 2 Science Party candidates in Tasmania and one in Victoria.
Excellent. Yeah. That's great. And that's really democracy at work, really, isn't it? It's about people at a ground level thinking, well, here's something that I really believe in. Here's something that I believe in the politics of. And I want to put my money where my mouth is, basically. Just say I'm not just spouting what I believe in on social media. I'm going to stand up and I'm going to represent the people that I believe in. And we were very lucky to have Brendan at the Hornsby Chamber of Commerce event last week, where we had all 7 candidates speaking up and talking about their various policies. So we did have some really good information from you. I particularly liked the point at which you mentioned that the importance of science, not just in terms of talking about innovation, not just in terms of saying the words and throwing them around, but actually having some solid policy. Which of the political parties would you align yourself with? I mean, talk to me about the voting procedure and where your preferences lie.
All right, so we've actually done a preference deal with for at least this seat of Berowra.
So it's done seat by seat.
Yes, that's right.
Excellent.
I mean, there is one in the Senate, right?
That's the big one.
Yeah, but in this seat, the candidates have more of a control of choosing who wants to be their preferences in a particular area, because obviously in different areas we've got different other candidates from different parties.
Yes.
So we've done a preference deal with the Labor and the Greens, and we did a preference circle, right? So basically,
circle.
yeah.
How does that work?
So Labor's preference to the Greens second, Greens preference us second, and we preference Labor second.
Okay, so it goes around and around and around.
That's correct.
Excellent. That's very fair.
Yeah,
I like that.
Yeah. So and that was a thing that was suggested, and everyone agreed, and we've very happy with that. And I suppose there's not that other many parties in here that are not known. We've got a few independents.
Yeah, and that's exciting, isn't it? And real local people who are standing up as well. Not to say that the other parties are not as equally important, but it's good to have that democracy really at work. We're not just talking about two or three.
Yeah, so I really like that. I mean, Mick Gallagher is running again, and he's probably the longest running candidate.
Yes, he is.
Yeah.
Is it the Old Bastards Party? Yeah. I can't remember. He did say that a number of times the other night.
Yeah.
But I like the old keep the bastards honest. And to be honest, that's what the minor parties are all about, giving us options. And that's what we're doing here on Small Biz Matters here on Triple H today. We're talking to Brenton Clarke, who's from the Science Party. He's our candidate for the Berowra seat, which is right in the heart of where we're sitting right now at the Triple H studios. And we're talking to Brenton about various policies and how he got into politics. So your background in terms of your professional life, because as we were talking before the show, a lot of the minor parties are not career politicians. They're not salaried. They don't have a team of people other than their family who are possibly colouring in and making it look fabulous. So what is it that you do professionally? Because I think the people around here, we really like to get to know our candidates. So what is it you do for a cost?
Okay, so I work at the Commonwealth Bank at the moment. I'm a systems engineer, and I work with the bank-to-bank proxies, which is basically a computer system which allows the bank to talk to another system.
Excellent.
In the internet. So I've been doing that for a few years.
And that's a computer engineering background?
Yes, yes.
Excellent.
Yes.
Well educated. I like it.
Back in Newcastle University.
Excellent. Oh, very local indeed. Okay, so let's talk about some of the questions we're going to be talking about today. Firstly, a hot topic, because I was just listening to 702 this morning, and they were interviewing a number of farmers actually, and I thought I'd start off the show by just talking about the NBN and how important it is, not just for us here in Hornsby. Yes, we're still waiting, everyone, as my small business colleagues would know. We still don't have the NBN. I still have one of the world's slowest machines because of the bad internet we have here, which sometimes drops out. But I think worse still are those people who are trying to rely so heavily on it for their businesses, such as farmers, particularly in rural areas. They were mentioning this morning that some farmers are having to minimise the amount of education their kids get because of the banned data allowance that they can have. So here we talk about naked DSL. We get 100, as much unlimited data as we like for, what are we paying, $60 a month? If they want the same amount, they have to pay $300 a month. That's 6 times as much. And they have to do things like restrict the amount of bandwidth their kids can use for education, which they're learning on the waves instead of being face-to-face education. And one incident was talking about a farmer who had spent $500,000 on a piece of equipment which does rely on internet connectivity, and he couldn't use it because of the dropping out, the dropouts and things like that. Now, I know one of the options for rural Australia is satellite internet. What's your feeling on that and the feeling about rural NBN as a whole?
I think the NBN done right is probably the biggest infrastructure project in Australia, besides, of course, the Snowy Hydro scheme. And it was being deliberately crippled by the Liberal Party. So one of the things that Labor was talking about on Q&A, or Bill Shorten's Q&A last Monday, was the fact that to actually increase it to at least for fibre to the premises for almost the rest of the people, another 2.5 million people, it's only like another $2.9 billion or something like that, which sounds like a lot of money, But that's
not in a federal budget perspective. It doesn't.
No, it's literally only about that much money greater than what the coalition spent, or will spend. And the difference is that coalition's thing has to be basically ripped up and replaced with fibre to the premises in the future anyway, so at a bigger cost.
So right now the NBN, as we know it, as what the Liberal Party is doing, it's based on copper technology, is that correct?
But one of the things that they call as a multi-technology mix, right, which is terrible. So what they tried to do, or what they tried to sell to the Australian public, was that they were going to build fibre to the node. They were going to reuse the copper wire in the ground.
What's the node?
Oh, a node is just a box on the street.
Great, thank you.
Right. So the Labor's model was going to, or the fibre to the premises model was basically a fibre optic goes directly from the exchange to your house. Okay. In the fibre to the node, they terminate that into a box on the street, and then they run the existing copper wires that's already in the ground to your house. Now, that makes sense for some communities, but it has no place in the cities at all. One of the things is the expense and the distance. The further you're away from the node, the slower your connection gets.
Can I just ask you, the node is the same thing we're talking about, like when we look up to buying new houses, because we obviously use the internet quite heavily in our household. When we look at buying houses, we've been looking at how the distance it is from the exchange. Is that what you mean by the node when we're talking in these sort of areas?
In this case, no. For ADSL, definitely you want to be as close as possible to the exchange.
Right.
In fibre to the node, each node is similar to an exchange, right? So it'll be closer, right? That's how they can promise the faster speeds.
Okay.
But you're still limited for how far away you are from the node.
Uh-huh.
So it'll be better than what you get in ADSL, but still terrible. And the big problem is you don't know the quality of the copper wire in your house. If you're in an older house, you could have very bad quality copper, in which case you're going to get a much slower speed.
Doesn't that mean that they're just pushing the cost of improving internet back onto the householder because you'd have to replace the copper wiring that's in your house if it's old and crusty?
Well, it's not in the house. It's also in the ground.
Oh, leading up to.
Yeah, exactly right. And some of those pits, if you've seen the photos, are pretty terrible and pretty degraded. So to answer the question about the farmers, it all sort of relates. So the original NBN plan was not just going to be everyone gets fibre. Unfortunately, Australia's way too big for that. So it was always going to be a mix. It was going to be a mix of fibre to the home, it was going to be fixed wireless, and it was going to be satellite. So obviously it's a little bit too expensive to run fibre optics to every farmer's house, especially in remote rural communities, in which case satellite is very, very important.
But they're saying that the farmers are all saying that the satellite is inadequate. Those of them who've already had the satellite NBN rolled out say it's terrible, that it drops out. It depends on the cloud, literally cloud coverage. It depends on a lot of different factors. Even other satellites passing in front of that satellite can really affect things. So is that all they've got to hope for?
Oh, well, the other big problem is that we need to launch more satellites. Right. So
and that would improve things for rural farmers
absolutely.
in terms of the NBN?
Now, it's not going to be as good as having fibre to your house, of course. But remember, the whole idea was to do this affordably. Now, the Liberal government successfully ran a scare campaign, and they were saying $90 billion and things like that, right? The big problem is it's not a lot of money, right? It sounds like a lot of money, but it's not, especially when you're building a big infrastructure project. So the real cost is more closer to $59 billion, and I think the coalition's model is around about 57. So it's really not much difference when they finally complete it. But the damage that they've done to Australia's economic, I suppose, speed ranking, we were 30th in the world. Now we're 60th in the world in speed.
Yeah, I've heard there's countries like Estonia who are super fast compared to us. And really, what we all have to remember is that as businesses, we are competing on a world scale.
Absolutely.
Even me, as a little bookkeeper with Boyd Office Management Services, proud supporters of Triple H, even me are doing that. I'm competing with bookkeepers who are paid a stupid minimal wage in India, who are doing exactly the same thing as I do, who have got the speed and connectivity to be able to work faster. Online. So every single business is affected by this.
Oh, absolutely. So just remember, everyone that's on the slow NBN, especially for small businesses and online community, they're potential customers, right? And I remember when I used to be on ADSL, I couldn't download or I couldn't watch YouTube videos. I couldn't use streaming services. I couldn't play games on Steam because it was just too slow.
But is that what this is really about? I mean, is everyone just complaining because we need to be playing more games or streaming more videos or watching Game of Thrones live instead of waiting for it to come out on, iTunes? I mean, isn't this a bigger problem in terms of the economy as well?
Well, it all relates. Okay, so remember when they tried to run the scare campaign in the NBN, they were talking about it's just going to be expensive video game network. Most people don't actually understand that the video game network industry is bigger than the movie industry. So it's a lot of money. So, okay, it's entertainment, right? But some person's entertainment is another person's business.
Good point.
All right. And when we're talking about streaming Game of Thrones early, well, it doesn't matter, right? Because say you want to, Apple, they also sell a legitimate streaming network, but still, if you got a slow internet, it doesn't matter which one, you still can't access it.
That's right.
Right. And for our farmers, they can't get this content. And if it's the expensive machinery, okay. So a lot of the new technology and machinery now requires firmware upgrades, regular updates like Windows does. And so if you don't have that, then you're going to be up for a lot of money. It's either going to be slow or it's going to be very expensive. We already had cases where Windows 10 is upgraded on people's machines automatically, and they've been on inadequate or fixed wireless or something like that broadband, and it's downloaded. And they've been on satellite connections where it costs money per megabyte, right? And so it's cost them a lot of money. Now, ubiquitous internet, which is what the promise of the original NBN was.
Just explain to me what that is, ubiquitous internet.
Oh, that just means that everyone has guaranteed of getting internet wherever they are of approximately the same level. All right?
Is that even possible in a place like Australia where we've got such, a variety of landscapes and distance and geography?
Oh, I think it is. I think obviously you've got to be realistic that certain people in remote rural communities are not going to be able to get the same services of close to the city, at least initially, because the tyranny of distance. Okay, so you have to really rely on, at the moment, satellite or wireless. But anyone that's in a small rural town shouldn't have an excuse. They should be able to be connected because most of the town systems are already connected by copper wire. It's trivial to run fibre optic up the same streets. Each rural town should be connected by fibre. Remember, that's the backbone of the internet. And then how it gets to the actual person's home, that could be done by fixed wireless or something like that.
So you agree that the necessity for it to be a varietal
Yes.
platform, whether it be based on some of the copper wiring, depending on the age and the ability, and some fibre that runs to, say, a town, which then has a node, and then that runs out to all the houses, possibly implementing more nodes to get them closer to each of the areas of a town. Is that how it works?
It could be done like that. I think the big problem is that they've done it in the city, right? And they've done it in cities where it makes sense to actually not run nodes.
Because the fibre technology is already there?
Well, the fibre technology, it's cheaper to run, right? So if you can run fibre optic to the city, you get your return back on the money quicker.
Because there's more people using it?
Because there's more people using it.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay.
And the satellites that they've actually launched, they need to launch more satellites to actually be able to send the same amount of bandwidth to the farmers, right? The less satellites you have, the more the bandwidth's restricted, also the more expensive it is.
So condense this down for me real quick. What is the main difference between what the Liberal policy is for the NBN versus what the Science Party policy is? Apart from that extra $2 billion, which in my mind is a no-brainer, but what are the main key points of difference? If they're both working off varietal platforms, what makes the Science Party's NBN policy different from the Liberal Party's?
Well, we're going to try to actually roll out fibre to the premises technology. That means that everyone possible will get fibre to the home. The difference of getting fibre to the home means you now get a guaranteed speed. So when the Liberals came into power, they said that you'll get up to speed. That's similar to what you get on ADSL. Now, everyone's got a mobile phone. They walk around, try to access the internet. And theoretically, on 4G, you can get up to 25, 40 megabits per second. But realistically, you're going to sit in a train, it doesn't connect at all, or sometimes does work, but it's very, very slow. That means you're still paying for the fast speed, but you don't get it. It's not reliable. Now, when you're at fibre to the home, you will get a guaranteed speed that you pay for. Up to 100 megabits per second, you get 100 megabits per second.
And where does that put us in that rankings?
Well, the ADS, the 100 megabits per second?
Yeah.
Oh, well, that puts us up pretty close, up to the top. I think we're up to about maximum peak speed of 39 megabits per second. Now, they've just turned on gigabit per second internet in other countries.
Which countries?
I think Japan has got an option now of 2 or 10 gigabits per second. Obviously, it's not rolled out everywhere yet, but it will be. Now, the great thing about fibre optic is its upgradability. So the big problem is, first one, node. A node is literally a box, like a small exchange, which runs fibre optic to it. It has a bunch of electronics and it turns into copper wire. That has to be powered. So it needs electricity and it needs battery backups. So those batteries have to be replaced every few years, and those boxes are big and ugly. The difference is fibre optic, it runs directly to your house. It requires no power, which means the boxes are smaller, right? And it's just driven straight to your house in your modem.
Is it more energy efficient?
Yes. And the best thing is, later on, when they want to get you a faster speed, they'll update the exchange. You buy a new modem in about 5 years or whatever it is, and then you'll get a gigabit a second.
I see.
Now, you can't do that in fibre to the node. Basically, you have to rip up the node and put a fibre to the house at a larger expense, because the longer we wait, the more expensive the labour will be. And that's one of the biggest costs of fibre to the node. It's maintenance of the copper, which the government now does, about $1 billion a year, and plus the actual rollout cost. Now, once you roll out fibre, because it's not interrupted by moisture or interference from electric wires and things like that, it requires almost no maintenance. So basically you have a larger capital expenditure up front and less maintenance cost. And that's where the fibre to the node will be terrible, because once it's built and everyone's using it, it'll have to be ripped up.
Well, we all know how important it is to spend big at the beginning when you have a business, for example.
Yes,
we all know about that, the importance of investing in capital in order to grow your business, and no different really from the NBN. You're here on Small Biz Matters on Triple H 100.1 FM. We're going to go to a short break, then we'll be back with Brendan Clarke, our local candidate from the Science Party for the seat of Berowra. You're listening to Triple H. So we're talking to the Science Party all about sciencey things. Gee, that sounded a bit juvenile, didn't it? And we're talking about it because we have an upcoming federal election on the 2nd of July. Now, just before the break, we were talking about the NBN, getting a little bit technical, which is good, Brendan, because nobody explains this to us as businesses, as individuals. It seems to be muddied down a little bit to just be a little bit about, fibre versus copper, when it's actually quite complex, and there's reasons behind why one is chosen over the other, and why one political party has a policy in regards to one, not the other. Now, just during the break, we were talking a little bit about why does this matter to small business? Now, I'm sitting here going, because I need it to be fast and I need it to be cheap. But talk to me about why I think, and here on Small Biz Matters, we believe the NBN is the most important issue of the federal budget when it comes to the economy, when it comes to everything. But why is it so important for small business in your mind?
All right. So my belief is that small business is your driver of the economy, basically. So, everyone looks at the large businesses, but when you go for your coffees, you go buy your petrol, you do all these other services, it's all the small companies. And they're very agile because they don't have a lot of money, so they're very innovative. They're trying to do as much as they can with as little as possible. So one of the things is if you've got a fast internet, it opens up a lot of services that you can use as a small business to make it cheaper. So traditionally, you'd say, for instance, you're working with some data or you want to back it up. So what do? You go buy lots of hard drives, you get a big server, you pay lots of money for the backup services. So nowadays, you can put it all in the cloud. So you've got Amazon, you've got Microsoft OneDrive, you've got Google Docs. Right, so you can do a lot of stuff with Google Docs. A lot of businesses are using that, plus Gmail. If you're going to send a lot of files, or you're going to be doing a lot of backups, if you're doing photography, if you're doing video editing, you need to upload those things. With the fibre to the home, basically, or fibre to your business, you get a faster upload, not just download. And upload becomes absolutely critical when you're a business because you need to get the files to the cloud in the first place. So with the fibre, the maximum speed at the moment that's usually commercially available is 100 megabits per second down and 40 megabits per second up. So I've got cable internet at the moment. I get 100 megabits per second today. But upload is about 1.5. All right? Still fast. But when you're a business, it's not fast enough. You don't have time to wait for downloads. You've got other customers to service. So therefore, that's one of the promises. You got the fast upload. And that's what will make you competitive. Instead of paying large amounts of money for server infrastructure, you pay a subscription fee, which is a little bit cheaper, and you can do all your stuff online. And getting it up to the internet is absolutely critical. You got to send out large files. So recently we've had to do some advertising for our political party. We had to upload 32 megabytes of files to get stuff printed. Now, on my connection, it took quite a while. On a slower connection, you're going to be waiting an hour, right? So that's not good enough. And what you do by actually creating a faster connection for businesses is you make them more agile. Right? And
less time spent at doing all the uploading, then
right.
you can actually start servicing your clients. Exactly what you said.
Absolutely.
No, that's a really good point. Now, we're going to talk about a different topic altogether now, which is renewable energy, something that my listeners will know is very close to my heart. We're a big uptaker of renewable energy here in the Hornsby area, particularly if you look out at Galston, Dural, those areas out there. There's Cherrybrook. There's quite a few homes with solar power and solar technology. Now, it was something that I talked obviously with Emma Heidi from the Greens about, which is, what is your policy when it comes to renewables specifically?
So we want to introduce an emission trading scheme. We think that's the best way to promote investment into renewable energies, especially for small businesses, and also possibly offer tax incentives or something like that. There are other models which we're discussing on the best way to doing things. Obviously, we're the science party, so we like to have evidence behind our ideas. Yeah. So there are models that we're looking at the moment, such as there was talk about getting bonds and getting a government actually loaning at a cheaper rate and buying bonds so you can actually earn a return as a small business to actually allow you to put those things on. Policy I think hasn't been defined yet. We're still working on it. But the main one is a emission trading scheme.
So just remind me again, because it's not something that's been discussed in the media at great length since it was dumped. What is it that is an emissions trading scheme? The big guys who spew out all the pollution have to buy...
Yeah, they basically...
credits?
Yeah, that's right.
Right.
And obviously the more cheaper energy you use, the more renewable energy you use, you can actually offset.
So it's more of an incentive scheme.
It's an incentive scheme.
You're going to get penalised and you're going to have to buy back the energy credits.
That's
who's in charge of that? Is that in your science party's mind, is that an independent organisation or is it the government that maintains that scheme? I
don't know who's going to be doing that. I'm not the actual energy spokesperson,
right.
sorry. But,
I hear you.
But yeah, the whole idea is actually we'll make energy more expensive for basically big polluters, in which case it'll give them incentives to actually adopt renewable energy. That's basically how it works.
And what's the incentive for a small business like me to stick some solar panels on my roof? Is there any rebates in that in your policy as well for the smaller people and the independents?
I don't know any rebates. Just the emission trading scheme at this moment. We do have other policies on more of modernising the grid because a lot of the actual cost of electricity to people is not the actual electricity usage; it's the actual poles and wires. So there's a policy where they actually gold plating the network. You might have heard of it, where the government had given incentives for or money to electricity companies to build more infrastructure, and they reimburse the energy companies for doing that investment. A lot of it's not necessary, right? But they do it because they get money for that, all right? So that's added a lot of cost to electricity, and it wasn't the carbon tax. It was actually this poles and wires investment, and some of it's unnecessary. Other ones is the fact that they didn't actually do a lot of the maintenance over long time.
But isn't that a little bit narrow-minded? Isn't that only thinking so far in advance? Because aren't we heading towards a technology which means that we are farming our own energy, holding it in potentially large-sized batteries around the home or on the outside of the home, and using our own energy that we've mined ourselves? Why do we even need to be upgrading poles and wires when they are not?
Oh, you still need base load power. So even though you've got a lot of solar and you've got a lot of storage batteries, so you would have heard it. There's an Australian company who's doing this. I'm not sure the name of it, but there's a famous one which is Tesla. And there's a lot of this battery technology coming into Australia.
Yes.
And it makes sense to store that. But the problem is when you're actually, depending on your size of your business or your home, you may not have enough power to run things like air conditioners, right? So you're still going to need power from the grid. So that's unfortunately the problem at the moment. So you still need a grid system to supply power, and to equalise the network.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, but I have talked to a lot of people who actually have solar energy, especially large solar projects on the house or the business, and they can do a lot of that stuff without actually using any power from the grid at all. But of course, if they have to operate sort of businesses, heavy machinery, or you've got refrigeration and things like that, that's when you'll need to get from the grid, because that's kind of power intensive. And of course, solar cells don't work at night time, but that's where you use your batteries. But if you turn your air conditioning on, you're going to have to go to the grid for that.
So no matter what, we do need in some way to upscale those, improve those poles and wires.
Yeah. So yeah, that's necessary. The other thing we were trying to do is to modernise the grid and also introduce smart meters, right? Because this actually allows a more efficient usage of the grid.
So the smart meters are the shoulder, the peak and the off-peak?
That's right.
Don't the majority of people have that already? I thought they were already rolled out.
It's not rolled out everywhere, right? New houses, obviously. My house doesn't have a smart meter, but it depends on the age of your house. Yeah.
Or if you update your,
That's right.
if you update your electricity, you have to actually have a meter put in.
That's right.
So that would be one of the policies that you had to have to enforce people to be thinking more about their meterage.
Well, yeah, so energy usage is very important, and also giving you the tools to know what energy you're using at the moment. And also actually the actual grids themselves, right? Modernising those grids to make sure that not just got bigger wires, but they're actually controlled properly so that power is distributed correctly.
Okay.
There's also one of our policies is to actually connect some of the large grids to other grids, right? So you can actually share power between areas.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Which means that one power station may be producing excess power station, and it can feed into the ones not producing enough.
Yeah, like
right?
an overflow system.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Or it means you don't necessarily have to have both power stations running full ball.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I know they were talking about that with coal technology a few years ago as well, trying to improve in case of blackouts, because they were being a bit concerned about blackouts in the times of high use of air conditioners, for instance. Look, you're on Triple H 100.1 FM. We're going to go to a very quick break with a word of a couple of our sponsors, and then we'll be back with Brendan from the Science Party. We're going to talk a little bit about other policies to do with small business when we come back after the break. And you're back with Small Biz Matters on Triple H 100.1 FM. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Here you're with Alexi Boyd and Brendan Clarke, who is our candidate for the Science Party in the seat of Berowra. A very lucky, great democratic process in action here on Small Biz. Now, we were just talking before the break quite detail about the NBN and also about renewable energy and the Science Party's policy on that. But let's talk a little bit about something which I think me and my listeners would agree is disastrous, which is the funding cuts to the CSIRO. Now, am I right in thinking, as I watch the news, that the government is scrambling with Malcolm Turnbull's recent, coming of age into the leadership position, is that they're scrambling to say, oh, no, we didn't mean to cut all those jobs or cut all that funding. Let's put it all back in again. Is that just like a Band-Aid method? It's just, they're just trying to gaff tape it all back together again after poor policy decisions?
I don't know. You just can't keep up with what they're doing, actually. So they're certainly backflipping a lot because one of the things that they've actually noticed is that, well, I suppose go back to Medicare, which is not really part of this topic, but first they're going to kill it, right? There's been a big scare campaign going on, by Labor saying that they're going to kill Medicare. It all looks like they're going to kill Medicare. And then Malcolm Turnbull's going, no, we're not touching Medicare, right? So the actual opinion that's happened on TV, radio, newspaper, everywhere is that they're going to do one thing, and then when they decide it's toxic, they try to pull back. Unfortunately, with the case of CSIRO, you can't really put it back, right? Because, Tony Abbott killed the position of the science minister. Malcolm Turnbull sort of put it back again. They put Christopher Pyne in charge of it, and he's cut a whole bunch of jobs off the CSIRO. So once those scientists go, they don't come back, and they take all the years of experience with them. So it's one of the really, really devastating thing to the Australian economy is the CSIRO getting cut. So we've had the CSIRO actually actively developing technology in an unrelated matter, which actually is used in all modern Wi-Fi. And Australia gets an income from that, from overseas as part of patents for royalties. The other thing that we do is there's talks now that in about 2 years they might close down Parkes Telescope, right, because it's going to run out of funding.
Yeah, I did read about that actually.
Right, and that's just really tragic.
Is that just from a historical perspective, though? What relevance has the Parkes Telescope got now? Isn't it a bit old technology? I mean, am I right in thinking that?
To be honest, I don't know how well its technology is kept up to date, but it's still in use. And it's also an iconic landmark as well. It was used in, as long as the moon landing as well, to listen in. So, but it's still in use today, and they do a lot of research there. But the fact that they're not going to fund it anymore because it's just going to run out of funding is really tragic. They've got rid of we've got climate change. Climate change is very important. They've got rid of a lot of the scientists who are studying climate change, right? Now, climate change just doesn't go away now that everyone says, oh, we believe in it. You've got to actually have scientists now to know how you're going to cope with it, all right? We've got the destruction of the Great Barrier Reef, right? So what are we going to do? We need scientists to go and research that. But we keep cutting them, right? So we, as a science party, think that that's really dumb. And we would like to actually double the research funding.
So if we double the research funding that goes to the CSIRO, but if the economy is slowly losing momentum, where do we get the funds for that? Where would you see the funds redirected from? In one sense, taking from one, giving to another in order to double that funding once again?
Sure. So the one of the things is the science actually drives economic growth, right? As a new technology comes in, people buy it. Well, that's it. And it also makes businesses more competitive. So, and it also makes new businesses that weren't possible before to be able to be formed. There's a lot of startup companies who are all the rage at the moment. I know quite a lot of those as well. And they're all forming new products and services. So new research becomes new technology. There's new business opportunities. Malcolm Turnbull's going to give $50 billion of tax cuts to large businesses. I don't quite necessarily mind the small businesses getting some assistance, but the amount of money he's giving, which is $50 billion, which predominantly affects business and not the small business, and almost achieves zero economic advantage. So you're not getting anything for your buck. All right, if we put that money somewhere else, we're going to get a much better return on investment.
So that would be one of the areas that you would see that the funding is removed.
Absolutely.
Is those rebates and discounts for small business, for large business when it comes to their tax cuts.
Oh, absolutely. Large businesses don't need it, right? So it's trickle-down economics. And we all know, or we should know, that trickle-down economics never works. One of the big problems or the fallacies of giving money to large businesses, thinking that you're going to employ more people, is that if I give you more money, you're going to now suddenly grab a few more workers and put them on. The reality is not that at all. What actually happens is that money usually gets absorbed into the CEO's bonus and shareholders. The reason that happens is because if I get a lot of money as a big business, I won't put in any staff unless I got new customers, all right? And it's the same with small business. you're not going to put on any customers for your small business if you've got no additional customers. It doesn't make sense, right? So if I give that money to other people and create businesses, and customers have more money, they will come and spend money at your business. If they spend money at your business, as the demand increases, you'll employ more workers. So giving big, large tax cuts to large businesses basically erodes your revenue base, which means you can't fund other projects. But it doesn't actually add any economic advantages. It just makes people richer. And a lot of those companies which are going to get this tax advantage are multinationals overseas, right? So there's pretty much a huge amount of money with very, very little economic advantage. I'd much rather give that money to research, schools, education, that sort of stuff that people care about, than giving it to large business.
Now, one of the questions that came up the other night was from a young gentleman who was a student at university. He mentioned how difficult it was to the thought of leaving university after a 3 or 4 year degree with a massive debt, and that a lot of the Liberal Party's policies are moving more towards those heavy, more expensive degrees and dropping off the ones that are less valuable to them in terms of funds, in terms of HECS. What's the Science Party's policy when it comes to tertiary funding again, and then where does that black hole get filled from if you're going to increase tertiary funding?
So one of the things is we've got for farmers or people with a lot of assets, some of these fundings is tied to the amount of assets that your family has.
Yeah, you were mentioning that before we started. And those kids in rural areas, so they actually decide on how much the HECS debt is going to be based on the asset, on how asset rich their parents are.
Oh no, that's usually how much assistance you get.
Right.
Yeah, and the problem is if you're a poor university student. You've come from a farming background. Your farm could be worth multi-million dollars. The problem is because of the recent droughts and that your family's very poor. You've got a lot of debt. But the assets that you've got determines the amount of assistance you can get, right? So
it's not done on income.
No.
It's not income tax based.
Well, you generally don't have... No, it's assets.
Asset,
yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that. It's interesting.
And therefore that disadvantages people from those areas to be able to get the same assistance. Right, so we'd like to change that to make sure that everyone gets the fair opportunity. But also, education is not a money sink, right? When you get people educated, you don't just get more educated people. You get a whole bunch of economic advantages out of that. So one thing you get is you get less crime, you get less depression. People feel more engaged with the community and more productive, and they're generally more healthier, right? So that means that it doesn't put such a strain on the rest of your community and your budget, right? And not just universities, TAFE colleges is as well, right? So the government's put lots and lots of money into these private institutions, which rorted the system, and there's current inquiries going on at the moment. That's took away a lot of people who were going to TAFE colleges before because they were attracted by the generous fees and the free laptops and things like that. And it basically pulled resources out of the TAFE colleges. TAFE colleges used to be cheap. A lot of small businesses use people come out of TAFE. A lot of small businesses themselves learn about computers and running a small business from TAFE. They used to be relatively cheap. So now $2,000 to $3,000, it's moving towards a pricing of a university scheme. And it's really not good for anyone. So small businesses need tradespersons, they need office skills. And anyone who wants to be retrained, as the society changes, a lot of jobs are disappearing because of technology. And also just the modern economy, the way that we are competitive overseas. If you lose your job, you need to get retrained. So a lot of people, they go to TAFE to learn new skills. If they can't afford it or the courses are no longer available because there's not enough funding for them, then they're going to be missing out, and businesses are going to be missing out.
And there'll be health implications and
Absolutely.
implications for mental health issues and things like that.
That's right.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. But the question is, where do you find the funding? Where are you going to redirect the funding for if you want to increase the funding to education for all of those very good reasons? Something else has got to have money removed from it. So
I don't think that's true, because the government this is not necessarily a party policy policies, but this is my understanding of it. So the government, Liberal government, especially under Joe Hockey, was trying to tell you that the government runs like a household business, right? And therefore you've got to have a certain amount of money, and if you don't have enough money, you don't spend it. So you've got to always pull money out of other places. That's not true in government. Government makes money. The government prints its money, right? So obviously you can't do that, otherwise you get inflation and stuff, right? But it means the government can access things that you can't access as a person. It can access very, very cheap loans, all right? And it can also give tax incentives as well. And every dollar that you spend as a government, part of it comes back as tax. So you're not actually spending the whole amount anyway. So you can borrow money. We got the AAA rating. We got one of the best ratings in the world, and we can borrow money. Now, you don't have to borrow money all the time. The big problem, debt is not a problem. They always say that we've got a big debt in Australia. We've got a very, very small debt compared to the other countries in the world. Now, having debt is not always popular, but when the government goes out and borrows, the first thing the Liberal Party and the commentators, shock jocks, talk about, we're borrowing more money. Well, how many people out there borrow money for a house? You know, people are hugely in debt to get a house, and we go, that's okay. When the government does the same thing, that's not okay, right? So there's sort of double standards there. The government can borrow money. It can get it at a very, very cheap rate, and it should do that to put large investment projects underway, because they actually generate returns over long term, and you end up getting more money back. So people used to say that John Howard was a great economic manager because he had these surpluses. But what did he do with them? Nothing. He'd use them as tax cuts, right? So he didn't spend money on infrastructure, which means that as over time, that had to be put back. Therefore, the Labor government had to borrow more money to put the infrastructure back again. So we can do that again, right? As long as when you borrow the money, when you create debt in the government, that money is actually used for things that will help your economy. Education, health is very important, scientific research, things that will create jobs. If you don't have educated people, you will not have the jobs for the future. And that's fact.
That's in a nutshell is basically what the Science Party is all about. Look, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been really, really interesting, and it's, again, a really great opportunity for the people of Berowra to have options when it comes to who we vote for. Now, do you guys do the hand out the how to vote cards, or would you like to say here on air what your preference is if people wanted to give preference to the Science Party? How would you like to see people voting?
Oh, okay. We do have how to vote cards. I've just put them on my candidate page last night. Unfortunately, they're still printing.
Are they available online?
Yes.
Excellent. So people could go online, jump on their phone, work out how to vote, and not even need a piece of paper when they walk into the booth.
Correct. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Now, remember, you don't have to follow what we say on the thing. These are only our suggested. There's no preferences really in the election anymore. So you can vote 1 to 6 above the line. Or at House of Representatives, all right? So the lower house, you can actually just you can either vote 1 to 7, the 7 candidates here. Now we have a suggested thing. As I said, we've done a preference deals with the Greens and Labor, and so that we would suggest that you put Labor and Greens above the other parties, followed by the independents.
Right. Okay. So you can actually you can determine what your preferences are, or you can, if you just put a number 1, that's still a correct vote.
No. You have to actually now fill out all the boxes.
The ones under the 7.
In the Senate, we've got a coalition with the Cyclist Party. So we've called the Science Party and Cyclist Party. So we've got number 1, we're in column I.
Column I.
Yeah. But you should put 1 to 6 boxes.
Okay, 1 to 6 boxes above the line. Otherwise, I think you could vote 1 to 12 below the line.
Below the line.
Or you can go nuts and just do all of them, like I know some people did.
Yes, you can.
Yeah. Oh, look, that's great. Thank you so much for joining us today, Brendan. Now, next week we have Julie and Lisa coming on the show, the candidate for the Liberal Party. We'll be asking him similar questions, but you can, of course, jump on the Small Biz Matters Facebook page if you have any specific questions that you would like to ask Brendan. We can pass those on. And please like us on Facebook and check out the Small Biz Matters new website as well, which not only gives you podcasts of previous shows if you've missed any of them, but also gives you an exhaustive list of all events that are going on around the Upper North Shore for small businesses. Thank you again for coming on the show, Brendan.
Thank you for having me, Alexi.
It's a pleasure, and we'll see you all next week, 9 a.m. for Small Biz Matters here on Triple H 100.1 FM. Small Biz Matters, the half-hour program where you work on your business rather than in it.